there, and welcome to Know to Grow. I'm Lauren Wood, and I'm joined today by Savannah Ballweg. She is the OSU Extension Educator in Preble County, and today we are talking pumpkins. Everybody's all geared up for Halloween and harvest and have their front porches loaded with pumpkins. I know my kids have been painting pumpkins, and we went to the pumpkin show in Circleville and got to see some giant pumpkins. So we're going to chat a little bit about that today. My daughter immediately wanted to grow a giant pumpkin. So I don't know if we can touch on that, how realistic that is, or just growing any pumpkins, because I've heard they can be pretty prolific. So tell us a little bit about growing pumpkins and what we need to know if we want to do that next year.
Sure, absolutely. So pumpkins are a really important specialty crop in the state of Ohio. A lot of times when people think about the kind of agriculture in Ohio, we think of row cropping, corn, soy, wheat. When we think of specialty crops, other groups, especially vegetables, pumpkins, which are technically a fruit botanically, so that might be one that throws people off. But pumpkins are a really important industry in Ohio, and a lot of Ohio's soils and climates are pretty conducive to growing pumpkins. So pumpkins like a slightly alkaline soil, which we do have in this part of the state. So looking at pHs in the sixes, climate is suitable. They like well-drained soil, so wouldn't put them in a spot that's very inundated with water. High organic matter, so compost if you have some. But they aren't incredibly picky plants to grow if you have the space for them. And what the space for them entails would really depend on the cultivar that you're growing. So, like you mentioned, giant pumpkins. So there are some really large cultivars of pumpkins that can get almost to 3,000 pounds. And when you say a number like that, it really blows people's minds.
Yeah.
But look it up. It is real.
We're talking car-sized pumpkins
Absolutely.
here, right?
Heavier than some cars. Yes. Totally. So there are some really giant species. So those aren't the same cultivars as what you pick up at the store. So carving pumpkins, a lot of those, the cultivar, and cultivar just means cultivated variety. A lot of those are Howdens or Connecticut Fields. They have really sturdy walls, medium size, so that makes them really great for carving. So that's different than the really jumbo-sized ones that people will grow. Also, you might see at the store pie pumpkins. So as the name suggests, those are ones that are sweeter and better for baking. So sugar pie, New England pie, those are pretty common and easy to get your hands on. And also some more ornamental varieties. Some of them have kind of silly heads, so you might be familiar with the ones that have warts on them. Really popular cultivar there is knucklehead. I think that's kind of funny. There's a Cinderella, so it has a similar diameter as like a carving pumpkin, but it's shorter and squatter looking, so it has a bit of a fairy tale aesthetic to it.
Yeah, like the carriage, I assume, right?
Yes. Jardales are the ones, well, one of the ones that have more of a sagey or turquoise color. So there's a lot of morphological or appearance diversity in the group of pumpkins. Really interesting plants.
We tried to do sugar pie this year in our garden. Thought we had plenty of room, did, I don't know, 4 or 5 plants. They took over everything. We wound up, I told my husband, I'm like, I don't even want pumpkins anymore. Just get rid of them, because they were taking over my tomatillos, my peppers, like everything. I mean, I had everything. I thought I had it spaced okay. Clearly I didn't. What do you need to keep in mind about where you're planting, and because they sprawl? Obviously, they're vining plants. So what do you need to keep in mind with that?
So out of curiosity, what sort of spacing were you looking at?
We had probably, I'd say 3 to 4 feet between rows, and I think we probably planted them 3 feet between each plant, and it was clearly not enough.
So those are numbers that I see recommended a lot. But that being said, when you do have vining cultivars, it sounds a bit dramatic, but getting more towards 5 to 10 feet might be a safer bet. But what you did is what I see a lot of folks directed to do, but certain years when they just take off with the vining types, it can be, as you know,
it was interesting. I was a little disappointed because we had to get them out of there, else it was, like I said, taking over everything. Um, I've heard people though sometimes will just throw last year's pumpkins out, and then all of a sudden the next year they have pumpkins growing. Is
Yes.
there if that's something that you're wanting to do rather than being more intentional with the actual garden, what should you keep in mind?
So that is very true. You're creating a more competitive situation for the seeds that are going to germinate. So it is certainly going to be survival of the fittest from that brood. But that is definitely something that is possible to do. It's going to be a really tight cluster. It might be a bit hard to harvest those. But if you're just doing something for fun, kind of an experiment with kids, you certainly can do that. My recommendation, if you want a bit more control over how things go, would be as you're carving pumpkins, probably this week. It's been hard to resist not carving them earlier, but if you want them to look good for Halloween, you've
Yeah.
probably been waiting
Oh
until this
yeah.
week. This would be a good time to save the seeds. So, pumpkins are native species. A lot of native species will appreciate a cold spell to germinate, but pumpkins are actually usually do a little bit better if you save the seeds over the winter and then plant them after the last frost. So, that is certainly not to say you could not throw them out now. And I mean, that's what they're adapted to. They can survive. But if you want a higher success rate, it
Yeah.
would be worth it to clean those seeds, have them dry out, and then maybe May or so, actually plant those. So that would be a higher success rate.
Let's talk about carving pumpkins. Like you said, if you want them to look great for Halloween, this is the time to do it. So, what are the best tips? I know when I was a kid, we always cut them out around the top, but I know now I feel like a lot of people are doing the bottom so that they don't shrivel up and the top fall in. What is the best practice for carving your pumpkin?
Excellent question. So I'm in a similar boat. I don't think I saw anyone carving from the bottom when I was growing up, or
Yeah.
maybe I wasn't attentive enough. But that is very true that if you want to have this pumpkin out for more than a few days, you are going to start to have shriveling taking place. So the bottom is a decent option for that. And for most of the cultivars that are being used for carving, you're not going to have a ton of structural issues at the base. They were probably growing from there to begin with for most of their life. So that is definitely an alternative you can use. As far as preserving pumpkins, that's a question that I get asked a lot. Or I should say that your jack-o'-lantern. Some folks will rub the inside with diluted bleach to keep it from decaying sooner. I've gotten questions about how does that affect their palatability to wildlife. So I know a lot of folks that will throw the pumpkin out even without the seeds just for wildlife to eat once they're done as a jack-o'-lantern. What I'm hearing is that the bleach will evaporate enough that it's not going to be a huge issue for wildlife. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a scent difference and
Yeah.
maybe the more sterile environment is less appealing to wildlife. But that is a question that I've gotten asked because I know a lot of people do wipe down the pumpkin to keep it from decaying as fast.
Okay. If you're wanting to use your pumpkin guts from a carving pumpkin, can you? We never did. It sounds awful to say. We always just tossed everything. But can you use that for pumpkin pie? Can you use that for baking, or is it just not the right cultivar for that?
So not necessarily the best cultivar for that. And a lot of pumpkin products, they aren't necessarily coming from, I like calling it the guts because that's what we really call it. A lot of it's coming from the tissue that's inside of the pumpkin up against the walls. So there isn't as much, it's not to say it's not edible, that would be wrong, but not as much culinary value to the more mucousy type tissue that's around the seeds. Obviously, the seeds are very edible, though, so it's a benefit. I don't know if you ate many of those.
We never did. Actually, I was talking to Jamie Jarosik a few weeks ago about that. They apparently always roast their seeds.
We
and
did,
that's
yeah.
part of the fun of carving pumpkins. So what are some tips for that if you are wanting to roast your seeds and make that part of your family tradition?
Honestly, if you're willing to get your hands dirty, which you're already dirty from carving them, I really think it's not too much more work to actually do the sifting. Again, that mucousy type tissue will come off pretty quickly from the seed if you're rinsing. And then after that, as far as cooking them, they bake pretty easily. Well, when we were little, I remember eating them pretty much straight up with salt. But there's so many seasoning possibilities
yeah.
if you really wanted to get into it.
Yeah, for sure.
And And that's something about pumpkin in general is that there's so many savory and sweet options. It's
Hmm.
really versatile in that sense. So I think you could come up with a lot of different fun flavor combinations there.
Definitely something to try. Let's go back to the giant pumpkins.
Mhm.
Like I said, we were at the Circleville Pumpkin Show. They have a big
Awesome.
contest. I know we have several here closer to home as
Mhm.
well. What goes into growing those giant pumpkins? Obviously, as you mentioned, they're a different cultivar. I mean, are those just you set them out and they grow that big, or is it a whole lot of care and prodding to get them to that place?
I would say that the biggest factor is going to be having the right site and the right cultivar.
Hmm.
So, like we discussed before, most of your pumpkin cultivars are not going to be capable of that. So, a lot of it's coming down to genetics, and those are pumpkins that have specifically been bred, largest of the large, best of the best to
Hmm.
do that. Having a very nutritious site. So, this isn't going to be grown on someone's farm where they're not regularly soil testing and amending the soil. So those are definitely big factors. But as far as the actual caretaking of a pumpkin, once you have that flower pollinated, it's not like if we think of like a lot of like fruit orchards where there
Hmm.
is a ton of maintenance to the parent plant or tree.
Hmm.
Really, things are set in motion once that flower is pollinated. And I did want to add a note too about pumpkin pollination.
Hmm.
So the male and female flowers are separate on the plants,
Hmm.
and they do rely on insects to pollinate them. So usually bees, squash bees, bumblebees, honeybees. So that is an important note if you're raising these. You want to be careful with insecticide use when you have your flowers on because you don't want to accidentally hurt the bee population that you're depending on to make that work.
I had been watching some YouTube videos, my daughter and I, just trying to figure out how exactly they do it. And I know some people actually are hand
Yes.
pollinating, right? What does that entail exactly?
Yes. So for hand pollination in general, a lot of folks will default to using a paintbrush.
Hmm.
I've used Q-tips before, but paintbrushes are really a common method. And if you have a small patch, that's feasible.
Hmm.
If you're pumpkin farming, that's not going to be
No,
efficient, right?
definitely
But
not.
if you have some in your garden,
Hmm.
I and even if maybe you see some bees, but you aren't totally sure,
Hmm.
if you wanted to and you had excited kids who like to experiment, it
Yeah.
might be fun to double check and make sure things are pollinated.
All right. Definitely something to keep in mind for next year. We are going to take a break and be right back with Savannah to talk about fall flowers. Welcome back to Know to Grow. I'm Lauren Wood, along with Savannah Ballweg, OSU Extension Educator in Preble County. And we just finished talking about pumpkins. Had a great conversation, kind of learning what to do for next year in regards to growing pumpkins, and then also some great tips for carving pumpkins if you're doing that this week. So if you missed that segment, make sure you go back and rewatch. But we're also talking about fall ornamental flowering plants. And this is something I have never been able to do very well myself. So I'm really excited to hear what Savannah has to say in terms of just selecting plants and then care and knowing what to do when it really does get cold. So let us know exactly what we should do if we want to get started in this, Savannah.
hmm And Lauren, if it makes you feel any better, I have left some moms exposed to the
Oh,
cold
yeah.
before.
Hmm.
Poor things.
Yeah,
So
mine just
it's not just
it's
you.
such a busy time of year.
Yes.
And I keep it on myself. I'm like, it's just not my season to do this. It's okay. Like
Yes.
season in life, I mean. So
Right.
we'll get there one of these days.
That's funny. Yes. So there are a few species I would like to talk about,
Yeah.
but wanted to start off with mums just
Hmm.
because when you mention autumn flowering plants, that's really one of the first things that comes to mind for
Hmm.
people. And in terms of quantity, mums are one of the largest floricultural crops in the U.S. So they might not be the most expensive, right? So they're pretty cheap to pick
Yeah.
up just about anywhere. But
Yeah.
the fact that you can go to almost any big box store, even smaller than big box stores, and see mums out for sale is really astonishing how
Hmm.
popular they are in the U.S. They are a Eurasian species, so they're not native, but there aren't concerns invasiveness wise with them. Um, and they are in the aster family. So we're going to talk about a couple of other asters later on, but there are a lot of asters that do really well in the fall. And so mums obviously flower in the fall. Some species also in the spring, or I should say cultivars also in the spring. And so they're responding to the lower light, the shortening of the day conditions, as opposed to a lot of the flowering plants that we see in spring and in summer. And so they're a lot showier than most of our plants this time of year, and makes them a pretty easy sell, right? And
Oh, yeah, they're gorgeous. I'm always so
yes.
jealous of everybody's mums. I just don't know how to do them myself well.
And the smell too. I think the smell is nice as well. So they have a lot going for them. So I would say a lot of this, I guess this circles back a bit to what we were talking about with pumpkins, is going to come down to cultivar selection. So a lot of the plants that you see at the store, especially cheaper specimens, a lot of them are not cold hardy. So if you're having some trouble, if you're like me and you've had some mums exposed to the cold before, I would recommend looking into cold hardy species that are more tolerant of cold temperatures. They usually cost a little bit more, but on a huge plus side, those are perennial. So they're able to return next year and then year after year. So if you think of bang for your buck,
Yeah.
I think that's pretty appealing. Some of those cultivars include Mammoth, Belgian, Minnesota. So they are commercially available and going to be tougher than some of the other varieties that we have around here. But you do need to be watchful. And again, do as I say, not as I do. Be watchful with temperatures as we're getting into October. It doesn't have to be a hard frost to really affect the flower, as we all know. I think everyone's had a mum that was left out in
Well,
the
we
cold.
found out my first problem that I buy the cheap mums. So that's,
We
that
all
was it
have,
for
right?
sure. Yeah.
Well, and if you're willing to keep them in their pots and
Yeah.
take them inside or cover them with even just a sheet, you can make it work. But if you if you want something a little bit tougher, it might be worth looking into some
Okay.
other options. And there is tons of color diversity with the hardy and the standard mums. There's thousands of cultivars of mums, different flower shapes, different color shapes, even variations in the foliage. So it's a really saturated market, a lot of different options to look at.
Now, if I'm
for
wanting
sure.
to plant it to try and get it to come back next year, what do I need to keep in mind?
So in a perfect world, they would be planted before this time of year. So I know some folks, maybe you buy the plant and it's in a cute pot, or maybe even you want it like right outside your door or your porch. The later we get in, fall is a good time for planting. But once we're past Halloween and the ground is getting colder and colder, that is a bit more abrasive for a planting. So in an ideal world, you would get the plant earlier in the fall and plant it then. So cooler, moister than it is in the summer. That is really favorable for a lot of plants that grow around here. But as we get further in towards November, okay, Halloween's over, let's put this in the ground. Sometimes that can be a little bit trickier for a plant to acclimate to.
So mid-September maybe is when we'd be wanting to do
Yes,
that?
even early October, right?
Okay.
And it can also be hard to say when we have such crazy weather,
Oh, I know.
right?
We were in the 90s, what, half of
Right.
September this year?
Right.
Well, let's talk about some of the other cultivars that you said will do beautifully in the fall.
Yes, and so I did want to work in a native plant angle. So there are a lot of, and not exclusively aster family plants, but a lot of other members of that group do have fall flowers and are really tough. So there's a couple that I really like. If you have a space that you're willing to let look less manicured, one of the yellow flowering plants that we just saw before this mum, goldenrod, is a really, really tough plant that flowers, in the fall. Extremely low maintenance. It does like to spread, but it is excellent for pollinators. That is the goldenrod there. Another option, the blue colored plant that we have floating around in the pictures here, mist flower. Those also flower in the fall. That's one of mine out back with the little soldier bug on it. So that's a goldenrod or solidago beetle on it. And those are pollinators. They like things in the aster family. So It's not as cute as a bee or a butterfly, but it's doing its job out
Yeah.
there. And that is one of the toughest plants I've ever grown. It can live through just about anything.
Are these annuals or perennials?
Perennials,
Okay,
yes,
so you
yes.
plant it and you're good.
Yes, both of these are perennials. And then also we have a white coneflower picture floating around here. Yes, and
Oh,
so
beautiful.
that is a powwow white cultivar. That one has also been incredibly tough, flowering deep into October for me. So all distant relatives to the mum, but things that are native here and producing pollen and nectar for our pollinators in this last stretch before they're having a dormant wind down period. It's really important and not to bash our mums, but moms aren't really producing that. So
Yeah.
it's nice to be able to supplement that in for our pollinators and sort of filling different niches. It's hard to compete with a mum, that perfect round shape,
Yeah.
just covered in flowers. There's not a ton of plants that look quite like that. So if you're willing to experiment a bit more and have something that resembles our native ecology a bit more, there's some really awesome additions you could add to your garden. These are a lot lower maintenance than a mum is. And that's not to say that a mum is backbreaking work, but you do need to do the deadheading, do need to stay on top of things where a lot of our native plants are really resilient and don't need as much
I know,
modeling.
probably not native and probably not as helpful with the pollinators, but my grandma always does winter pansies. Is this when you're wanting to get those? She always does them on a box on her porch. Is this the time of year for that, or do we wait longer? What's the pansy plan?
I would wait a bit longer on that. I know that there is variability in how folks go about those, though. Sometimes I err on the side of caution personally.
All right. Something else I did want to touch on, I had just seen floating around Facebook recently, was overwintering onions. I believe Shakespeare onions were one of the varieties that was mentioned. Do you have any tips for that? If people, I know garlic should probably already be in the ground. Onions, is that something that we're wanting to get in now, or when, if you're doing an overwintering variety like that?
So if it is an overwintering variety, yeah, they do well with the cold stratification. So it really just is a matter of making sure that you're aware of what your variety is able to handle. So there are definitely going to be some that might not be as ideal for. So just making sure that you're double checking before you go through the trouble of acquiring them, or if you're planting them. Just making sure to double check on that because some do well with those colder conditions.
I know it would be pretty much the same as planting in the spring as far as distance apart and everything that you're doing. It's just going to be they'll be in there a lot longer. All right. Well, Savannah Ballweg, OSU Extension Educator with Preble County from OSU. We are so glad to have you with us again today, and we look forward to speaking with you again in the future. Thank you.
you.